My name is Michael Hayes, and I am 41 years old. I work as a senior underwriter for a commercial insurance firm in Spokane, Washington, a career built almost entirely on my ability to read the fine print other people skip over, to notice the detail buried on page 14 that changes the meaning of everything else in the document. It is a strange kind of irony, then, that for almost 4 months, I completely missed the detail hiding in plain sight inside my own family. The fact that my cousin Bradley had quietly built an entire reputation for himself out of a renovation project he never paid 1 cent toward. I did not fully understand the scope of what he had done until a contractor named Gary Whitlock, standing in my father's newly renovated bathroom with a clipboard in his hand, said something that changed the entire shape of that afternoon. And honestly, the entire shape of my relationship with my cousin going forward. Let me bring you to that moment first, because it is the reason I am telling this story at all. It was the first Sunday in May, and my family had gathered at my father's house in Coeur d'Alene, just across the Idaho border from where I live, for what we were calling the Renovation celebration. A small open house of sorts to show off the accessibility improvements that had been completed over the preceding 4 months. My father, Walter Hayes, is 74 years old and has used a wheelchair full-time since a stroke 3 years ago left him with significant mobility limitations on his left side. The house he had lived in for almost 40 years, a modest single-story rambler with narrow doorways and a step up into the bathroom, had become, in the years since his stroke, a source of daily difficulty and, worse, daily indignity. He could not get his wheelchair through the bathroom door without help. He could not get up the 2 steps at the front entrance without someone physically assisting him. He had, on more than one occasion, fallen trying to manage tasks independently that should have been simple, because his home simply had not been built for the body he now lived in. I had quietly funded a complete accessibility renovation for that house, a wheelchair ramp replacing the front steps, a fully accessible bathroom with a roll-in shower and widened doorway, lowered countertops in the kitchen, and a widened hallway to accommodate his wheelchair without him having to turn sideways to get through. The total cost, once everything was finished, came to almost $31,000. I had paid every invoice directly, in installments as the work progressed, over 4 months, working with a small local contractor named Gary Whitlock, who runs a 2-person operation specializing in aging in place and accessibility modifications. And on that Sunday afternoon, standing in my father's kitchen surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins admiring the new countertop height and the widened doorway, my cousin Bradley was accepting compliment after compliment for a project he had not funded, had not managed, and had, as far as I could tell, barely even shown up to check on during the actual 4 months of construction. I want to explain how this happened because I think the mechanics of it matter as much as the eventual reveal. My father's stroke happened 3 years ago in the spring, and it changed our family in ways that are still settling even now. My mother had passed away 6 years before that from ovarian cancer, so my father had been living alone in that rambler for several years before the stroke, managing fairly well on his own, still driving, still tending his small vegetable garden, still independent in the ways that matter most to a man of his generation. The stroke took a significant portion of that independence away, almost overnight. He spent nearly 2 months in a rehabilitation facility afterward, relearning basic mobility, adjusting to a body that no longer cooperated the way it once had, and when he finally came home, it became immediately clear that the house itself was now working against him. I remember the first time I visited him after he came home from rehab, watching him try to maneuver his wheelchair through the narrow bathroom doorway, watching the frustration, and, worse, the shame on his face when he could not manage it without help, when I had to physically assist my 71-year-old father into his own bathroom like he was a child. I remember driving home that night and sitting in my car in my own driveway for almost 20 minutes before I could bring myself to go inside, because I could not stop thinking about how unfair it was that a man who had worked construction his entire career, who had built additions onto half the houses in his old neighborhood with his own hands, could not now navigate his own home without assistance. I started looking into accessibility renovation costs almost immediately, but the timing was complicated. My father's retirement savings had been significantly depleted by the cost of his rehabilitation stay and ongoing physical therapy, and while there were some state assistance programs for accessibility modifications, the wait lists were long, often 18 months or more, and the coverage was partial at best. I did not want my father waiting 18 months to be able to use his own bathroom with dignity. I have a stable career and had been saving diligently for years, partly out of habit and partly, I think, because some part of me always suspected I would eventually need a significant reserve for exactly this kind of family emergency. I decided about 4 months before that renovation celebration that I was going to fund the project myself, quietly, without making it a whole production. I called Gary Whitlock, whose company had done accessibility work for a friend's mother a few years earlier, and I explained the situation. I told him I wanted to pay for everything directly, but that I did not want my father to feel like he was accepting an enormous financial burden from his son, something that I knew, from decades of understanding my father's particular brand of stubborn pride, would make him deeply uncomfortable, possibly even resistant to accepting the renovation at all. I completely understand, Gary told me. I've had families handle payment logistics this way before. I can process everything on your account and simply let your father know the project is fully funded and ready to move forward, without going into detail about the specific source of the funds, unless he asks directly. I do have to maintain accurate internal records of who's actually paying for licensing and tax purposes, but that's just paperwork on my end, not something I'd volunteer to anyone else. That arrangement worked exactly as I intended for a while. I paid the initial deposit in January, a follow-up payment in February once the ramp and bathroom framing were underway, and a final payment in April upon completion of the kitchen modifications. My father was overjoyed throughout the process, calling me regularly to describe his excitement about being able to get into his own bathroom independently for the first time in 3 years, about being able to wheel himself up the new ramp without assistance, about feeling, for the first time since his stroke, like his home was actually built for the person he had become rather than the person he used to be. What I did not anticipate, and what I did not discover until nearly the end of the project, was that my cousin Bradley had been quietly inserting himself into the narrative of this renovation almost from the very beginning. Bradley is my Uncle Frank's son, my father's nephew, 3 years younger than me, and someone I have always had a complicated relationship with, one built more on family obligation than genuine closeness. Bradley works in real estate, has always been image conscious in a way that borders on performative, the kind of person who posts elaborate vacation photos and expensive dinners on social media with a frequency that suggests the posting itself might matter more to him than the experiences being documented. He has, on more than one occasion throughout our lives, positioned himself as more involved in family caretaking than he actually was, a pattern I had noticed before, but never confronted directly, because it had never before cost anyone anything real. This time, it cost me $31,000 of quiet generosity, credited entirely to someone else. I first got a hint that something was off in early March, about halfway through the renovation project, when my Aunt Patricia, Bradley's mother, called me to say how proud she was of her son. Bradley told us he's been paying for your father's whole renovation, she said. The ramp, the bathroom, all of it. He said it's costing him a small fortune, but that Uncle Walter deserves it after everything he's been through. I think that's just wonderful, don't you? I remember sitting very still on my back porch, phone against my ear, feeling a familiar cold confusion settle into my chest, the same feeling I imagine countless people have felt in countless family kitchens across the country when a lie about their own generosity gets casually repeated back to them as fact. I did not correct my aunt in that moment. I told myself, the same way I imagine most people tell themselves in these situations, that there must be some kind of misunderstanding, that maybe Bradley had simply offered to help with some smaller piece of the project, a delivery fee, a fixture purchase, something modest that had somehow gotten inflated in the retelling into funding the entire renovation. I called my father the following week, carefully, trying to understand what he actually believed about how the project was being funded. Dad, I said, keeping my tone as casual as I could manage, has Bradley mentioned anything to you about helping pay for the renovation? Oh, he's been wonderful about it, my father said, and I could hear the genuine warmth in his voice, the specific gratitude of a proud man who does not like accepting help, but has clearly made peace with accepting it from a nephew he does not see as often as his own son. He told me not to worry about any of the costs. that he wanted to make sure I had everything I needed to be comfortable and independent again. I told him it was too much, but he insisted. Family looks out for family, he told me. I sat with that information for several days, turning it over, trying to decide how to handle it. Part of me wanted to simply call Bradley directly and ask him outright what he thought he was doing, but I kept coming back to the same hesitation that I suspect keeps most people quiet in these situations. My father was in the middle of a renovation that was genuinely improving his quality of life in ways that mattered enormously to him. I did not want to introduce family conflict into a period that was supposed to be about his independence and dignity, not about who deserved credit for making it possible. I told myself I would deal with the misunderstanding after the project was complete, quietly, privately, without disrupting my father's excitement about finally having a home that worked for him. I want to be honest that this decision, in hindsight, gave Bradley almost 2 additional months to entrench the lie even further within our family. By the time the renovation celebration rolled around in early May, Bradley had told the story in various forms to nearly every member of our extended family. My Uncle Frank had apparently told several of his golfing friends about his generous son. My cousin Denise, Bradley's sister, had posted something on social media congratulating her brother for stepping up for Uncle Walter the way he always does. The lie had grown roots throughout our entire extended family network, and I had, through my own hesitation, allowed it to grow largely unchallenged. I want to introduce you to Gary Whitlock more fully here, because his role in the eventual reveal was entirely unintentional, much like Carol Denny's role in a completely different family's wedding reveal, and much like Rosalind Pierce's accidental comment at a completely different family's barbecue. Gary is in his mid-50s, has run his small accessibility renovation company for almost 20 years, and takes genuine pride in the work he does, believing, correctly I think, that helping elderly and disabled clients maintain independence in their own homes is meaningful work deserving of recognition. He had no idea, walking into my father's renovation celebration that Sunday afternoon with his clipboard, that he was about to unravel 4 months of my cousin's carefully maintained fiction. The celebration itself was a warm, joyful gathering, exactly the kind of afternoon my father deserved after 3 years of daily frustration in a house that no longer served him. Nearly 20 family members had gathered, admiring the new ramp out front, taking turns wheeling my father up and down it while he laughed with a lightness I had not seen from him since before his stroke. Inside, people crowded into the newly renovated bathroom to admire the roll-in shower and widened doorway, and gathered in the kitchen to see the lowered countertops that now allowed my father to prepare simple meals from his wheelchair for the first time in years. Gary had come by at my invitation to do a final walkthrough and make sure everything had been completed to specification, and my father, delighted to have the contractor there, insisted he stay for some food and join the celebration for a few minutes before heading to his next appointment. It was in the kitchen, with nearly a dozen family members gathered around admiring the new countertop height, that my Uncle Frank clapped Gary on the shoulder and said warmly, "You did great work here. My son Bradley really came through for Walter, didn't he? Not every young guy would step up and pay for something like this." Gary, holding a small paper plate of food, looked genuinely puzzled for a moment. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion," he said. "I've been working directly with Michael on this project from the very beginning. He's the one who's handled every payment, every decision about materials, every schedule adjustment. I don't believe I've actually met Bradley in person at any point during the 4 months we've been working on this." The kitchen, which had been full of warm, overlapping conversation just moments earlier, went noticeably quieter. I watched my Uncle Frank's face shift into confusion, then something more uncertain. "Wait," he said slowly. "Bradley told us he paid for all of this. The ramp, the bathroom, everything. He said it was over $30,000. Gary, sensing he had walked into something more complicated than a simple compliment, glanced briefly at me, and I gave him the same small nod I imagine Carol Denny received at a different wedding, and Rosalind Pierce did not receive, but proceeded anyway at a different barbecue. Permission, implicit, to simply tell the truth. I have all of this documented in my project files, since I'm required to keep accurate payment records for licensing purposes," Gary said carefully. "Every payment for this renovation, The initial deposit, the progress payment in February, and the final payment last month came directly from Michael Hayes. I don't have any record of a payment from anyone named Bradley. I remember the specific quality of the silence that followed, the way it seemed to expand to fill every corner of my father's newly renovated kitchen. My father, sitting in his wheelchair near the lowered counter he could now actually use, looked between Gary and me with an expression of dawning confusion. "Michael," he said slowly, "is that true? Did you pay for all of this?" "I did, Dad," I said quietly, aware that every person in that kitchen was now listening intently. "I didn't want it to be a big thing. I just wanted you to have a house that actually worked for you." My Aunt Patricia, Bradley's mother, had gone very pale near the doorway. "But Bradley told me specifically," she said, her voice tight, "that he was covering all of it. He told me it was hard on his finances, but that it was worth it for family." I looked around the kitchen for Bradley and found him standing near the refrigerator, holding a can of soda, his face a careful blank that I recognized immediately as the specific expression of someone who has just watched a lie they had been maintaining for months collapse in real time, in front of an audience much larger than he had ever intended. "Bradley," my Uncle Frank said, turning to his son, "is this true? Did you not actually pay for any of this?" I want to describe what happened next as precisely as I can, because I think it illustrates something important about how these situations tend to unfold once the truth finally surfaces. Bradley did not immediately deny anything, because the ledger Gary was holding, quite literally a clipboard with itemized payment records, made outright denial impossible. Instead, he did what I have come to recognize as the standard first move in these moments, the same move Vanessa made at a wedding reception in a barn outside Xenia, Ohio. The same move Stephen made at a backyard barbecue in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. He reached for minimization. "I mean, I did help out," Bradley said, his voice climbing slightly, defensive. "I picked out some of the bathroom fixtures. I was there for some of the planning conversations." "Being there for planning conversations isn't the same as paying $31,000, I said, and I noticed, much as I imagine Daniel Brooks noticed at his own family confrontation, that my voice had a steadiness to it that surprised even me, a calm born of months of quietly absorbed frustration finally finding an outlet. "I never said the exact dollar amount," Bradley said. "You told me it was over $30,000, my Uncle Frank said. "You told me that specific number, Bradley, at my own kitchen table." The room had gone almost entirely silent now, except for the soft hum of my father's new accessible refrigerator and the distant sound of my young cousins playing in the front yard, oblivious to the reckoning happening inside. My father, I noticed, had willed himself slightly closer to me, his expression somewhere between hurt and a kind of weary recognition, as though some part of him had perhaps suspected something was not quite right about the story he had been told, without ever having the specific facts to challenge it. "Why didn't you tell me it was you, Michael?" my father asked, his voice quiet, meant just for me even though everyone in the kitchen could hear it. "Because I didn't want you feeling like you owed me something," I said. "I know how you are, Dad. I know you would have refused the renovation entirely if you thought I was spending my own savings on it, out of pride, out of not wanting to be a burden. I just wanted you to have a home you could move through safely and with dignity. I didn't need credit for that." My father was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his hands resting in his lap. "I would have refused," he admitted finally. "You're probably right about that. But I still would rather have known the truth than spent 4 months thanking the wrong person." That sentence, I think, captures something essential about why this kind of lie causes real damage, beyond just the unfairness of misplaced credit. My father had spent 4 months directing his genuine, heartfelt gratitude toward Bradley, calling him to thank him, telling other family members how generous his nephew had been, building a warmer relationship with Bradley specifically because of an act of generosity that Bradley had not actually performed. That misdirected gratitude was not a small thing. It was months of my father's genuine emotional energy spent on the wrong recipient because of a lie that could have been avoided entirely if Bradley had simply corrected the record the first time someone assumed he was the one paying. I want to be fair to Bradley here, in the same way I tried to be fair to Stephen and to Vanessa in their respective reckonings, because I think understanding the psychology behind these choices matters more than simply condemning the people who make them. Bradley, I later learned during a difficult conversation we had several weeks after the renovation celebration, had not set out from day one to deliberately claim credit for a project he never intended to pay for. The lie had apparently started small, almost accidentally, when someone at an early family gathering had asked him how the renovation planning was going, and he had said something vague like, "We're getting it handled," which had somehow, in the retelling among family members, transformed into an active claim of financial responsibility. Once that initial misunderstanding had taken root, Bradley told me he found it easier to simply let it continue than to correct it, especially once he began receiving the specific kind of warm, admiring attention from our extended family that comes from being seen as generous. It felt good, he admitted to me, during that later conversation, sitting across from me at a coffee shop near his real estate office. Everyone kept telling me what a good person I was, how proud they were of me. I know that sounds pathetic, hearing myself say it out loud. But once I had that kind of attention from the family, I didn't know how to give it up, even though I knew, every single time, that it wasn't actually true. I appreciated his honesty in that conversation, even though it came weeks after the actual damage had already been done. I told him, much as I imagined Daniel told his brother Stephen, that an apology to me was not really the point. The people he owed a genuine accounting to were my father, my Aunt Patricia, my Uncle Frank, and the broader network of family members he had allowed to believe something false for 4 months. To Bradley's credit, he did eventually make those corrections more thoroughly and more quickly than Vanessa ever did in the wedding story I mentioned earlier in similar circumstances. He called my father directly within the week, offering a genuine, unqualified apology, acknowledging clearly that he had let a small misunderstanding grow into something he should have corrected from the very beginning. He spoke with his own mother, my Aunt Patricia, and with my Uncle Frank, setting the record straight without minimizing or reframing what he had actually done. It did not erase the 4 months of misdirected gratitude my father had extended toward him, but it was, I think, a genuinely meaningful step toward repairing something that could have been left permanently broken. My relationship with Bradley today remains somewhat guarded, though not nearly as fractured as it might have been had he refused to acknowledge what happened the way Vanessa did in that other family story. We are cordial at family gatherings, even warm at times, but I have learned, the same way Daniel learned with his brother Stephen, to verify claims of generosity or good deeds rather than simply accepting them at face value. A habit I suspect will stay with me for a long time, perhaps permanently, in exactly the way that a single significant breach of trust tends to recalibrate how much benefit of the doubt you extend to someone going forward. My father, in the years since the renovation was completed, has flourished in ways that genuinely move me every time I visit. He wheels himself up his own ramp independently every single day. He prepares simple meals at his lowered countertop, something he had not been able to do since before his stroke. He gets into and out of his own shower without assistance, a small daily act of independence that restored something to him I do not think any of us fully appreciated the value of until we watched him lose it and then watched him get it back. He told me on the 1-year anniversary of the renovation's completion, sitting in his newly accessible kitchen with a cup of coffee he had made entirely by himself, that the thing he thinks about most now is not really the renovation itself, but the conversation that happened in that kitchen the day of the celebration, the moment he learned the truth about who had actually made his independence possible. "I don't need you to have done it quietly for me to appreciate it," he told me. "I would have appreciated it just as much if you'd told me from the beginning. Maybe more honestly, because I would have gotten to thank the right person the whole time, instead of thanking Bradley for 4 months for something he didn't do." I think about that conversation often now, the same way I imagine Emma Carter thinks about her sister's wedding, the same way Daniel Brooks thinks about his mother's divorce. There is a particular kind of quiet mistake so many of us make when we try to be generous without wanting credit for it. The mistake of assuming that silence is a neutral, harmless choice, when in reality, silence creates a space. And if you do not fill that space with the truth yourself, someone else, sometimes someone with far less honorable intentions, will fill it for you. I do not regret paying for my father's renovation. I would do it again in an instant, exactly the same way, without hesitation, because watching him move through his own home with dignity and independence again was worth every single dollar, and then some. But I have learned through this experience that quiet generosity without any accompanying truth leaves a door open for someone else to walk through. And I have learned to close that door a little more deliberately now, not because I need recognition, but because the people I love deserve to know, honestly and directly, who actually shows up for them when it matters. If you have ever quietly done something meaningful for someone you love, only to watch someone else step in and claim the credit for it, I want you to know that the truth is always worth telling, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it disrupts a celebration that was supposed to be simple and joyful. The people you love deserve to know where their gratitude actually belongs. If this story meant something to you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we bring you real stories just like this one every single week. Stories about family, about quiet sacrifice, and about the truth eventually finding its way to the surface no matter how long it takes. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever discovered someone in your own family claiming credit for something they didn't actually do? Give this video a like if you believe real generosity doesn't need an audience, but it also doesn't deserve to be stolen, and I will see you in the next story.